John chapter 4. We're going to finish this chapter this morning with a little story. Last time we talked about the Samaritan woman, which was a huge 42-verse story. We couldn't get through all of it. Now we're going to look at a little bitty story where there's not a whole lot of new information here, but I want to point out a couple of things this morning in our Bible study. So I want to begin by reading this story to you, beginning in verse 43 of John chapter 4. At the end of the 2-day stay, the 2 days in Samaria, after he had led the woman to the well, at the well to the Lord. Okay, so he stayed there for 2 days. So 2 days later, Jesus went into Galilee. He had previously said, "A prophet is honored everywhere except in his own country." The Galileans welcomed him, for they had just been in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration and had seen all his miraculous signs. In the course of his journey through Galilee, he arrived at the town of Cana, where he had turned the water into wine. There was a government official in the city of Capernaum whose son was very sick. When he heard that Jesus had come from Judea and was traveling in Galilee, he went over to Cana. He found Jesus and begged him to come to Capernaum with him to heal his son who was about to die. Jesus asked, "Must I do miraculous signs and wonders before you people will believe in me?" The official pleaded, "Lord, please come now before my little boy dies." Then Jesus told him, "Go back home, your son will live." And the man believed Jesus' word and started home. While he was on his way, some of his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. He asked them when the boy had begun to feel better, and they replied, "Yesterday afternoon at 1 o'clock his fever suddenly disappeared." When the father realized it was the same time that Jesus had told him, "Your son will live," and the officer and his entire household believed in Jesus. This was Jesus' second miraculous sign in Galilee after coming from Judea. So there's a couple things I want to point out before we get into our groups, in the way of introduction. I told you that John, the Gospel of John is built around 7 signs, 7 miracles that Jesus does. The first one was in Cana, and it was the turning of the water into wine. The second one is at Cana, and it's the healing of this man's son, not physically going to Capernaum, but just saying the word, and his word heals his son. And of course, the signs are always for one reason, and that is so people will believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Okay? So that's the big picture theme here. There's something I want to show you up front, though, that I find to be interesting. He says, at the end of 2 days' stay, Jesus went into Galilee. He had previously said, "A prophet is honored everywhere except in his own country." If you'll remember, and I have it in your notes somewhere, it's in Luke 4 and Mark 6. Jesus had gone home to Galilee before, to Nazareth, and the people had not believed in him. In Luke 4, right after he comes out of the wilderness, the first thing he does is come home and announces his ministry in the synagogue there up in his hometown, and they are offended by his words, and they try to drive him off a cliff, and he barely escapes with his life. Then a little later on in Mark 6, he goes back there again, and it says he tried to do a few miracles there but couldn't because of the lack of faith of the people in his hometown, and that's when it first quoted, Mark quoted, a prophet was without honor in his own country. But John is quick to say, because remember, he's not in chronological order, this is later on in Jesus' ministry, John comes home to Galilee, and guess what? People love him. People absolutely love him. And John points out, remember, it had been said, Jesus had said a prophet is without honor in his own country, but he tells us the Galileans welcomed him because they had been in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration and had seen all his miraculous signs. So he starts his ministry, so the first Passover has already passed right here. And during the first Passover, he was down in Jerusalem doing miracles. Remember the story of Nicodemus? The Galileans come down there and they see what he does, and they see his public ministry in Jerusalem. Previous to that, they had rejected him, wouldn't believe in him. Isn't that Mary's son and Joseph's son? Refused to believe in Jesus. Well, now that they saw Jesus in action down in Jerusalem, and it's now year 2 of his 3-year ministry, he's back up there and they're welcoming him with open arms, saying, "Please come and do these miracles among us as well." Okay? So that's a very interesting distinction that John wants us to point out. Okay? So we'll start there, but here's where I want us to start around our tables. I found this phrase that I thought was really interesting, and I have no idea who said it, but it is relatively easy to get the facts about Jesus, a little harder to believe the stories, but the difficult challenge is to step out in faith and believe that Jesus is the answer. And how many people do you know, oh, they believe in Jesus, they believe in religion, they believe in Christianity, but do you really believe that God has the power through Jesus Christ to inhabit your life and change you and have living stories in today's world the same as it was in the Gospels? I can't tell you how many Christians I know who say, well, yeah, Jesus used to be powerful, but then he retired, and now he's just kind of left us here to handle ourselves, right? The hard thing about Jesus, it's easier to believe in him than to believe that he can come in and do miracles in your life and change you. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. And so the first thing around the tables and up on the screen are these two questions under Roman numeral 1, letter B. Why do people have a difficult time believing in Jesus, especially in our culture? And then number 2, how do signs or miracles help a person believe? And we're going to go toward the end and talk about miracles today. But I just want you to think about those two questions, and then we'll come back and we'll dive into this story a little bit more. Let's jump in the story for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to leave it around the table for us to talk about application. The story's pretty simple. It's a man from Capernaum. That's about 20 miles away. That's a full day's walk, probably, in that culture. Okay? Capernaum, he was an official in that city. From what I read, it was probably one of Herod's officials, because Herod was the, quote, king of Galilee. And so he probably worked in Herod's court, okay? If you'll remember, Herod, who was king, came down, part of Jesus' trial he sent to Herod because they found out Jesus was from Galilee, and Pilate was trying to not have to take responsibility for Jesus. So that's how Herod fits into that whole story. So this guy comes to him, and he's a government official, and he says, please, 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 my son is going to die. He's sick. He's not going to make it. Please come back with me, because I believe if you come back with me and you pray over my son, he will be healed. So this guy has faith that Jesus could heal. Maybe he's seen him heal. Maybe he was down in Jerusalem at the previous Passover. We don't know why, but somehow this man had seen Jesus or had heard that Jesus could perform miracles, could heal people, and he believed. Doesn't matter how, doesn't matter why, doesn't matter what he witnessed. The key is he believed Jesus could do it. Well, Jesus turns to the crowds, and that's when he says, okay, do I have to do these miraculous signs for you to believe, or will you just believe? And then he doesn't say anything else. It's almost like he's testing that man. So imagine Jesus is talking, he's teaching. This man comes up and says, please, will you heal my son? It's almost like Jesus just kind of ignores him and turns away from him and is talking to the crowds again. But the guy won't give up. And he says, listen to me. I'm begging you, come heal my son. So for the second time, the official pleaded, Lord, please come now before my little boy dies. There's desperation in this man. Please come now. We can't wait. You've got to go with me. And it's so interesting to me how many times in the gospel, I want you to think about this. Somebody has to ask multiple times before Jesus responds. Somebody will ask, he'll continue on teaching, and they'll say, please, please. They won't take no for an answer. And I just wonder if there's something about Jesus that responds to people who refuse to give up. You go and pray, you don't get an answer, you go and pray, you don't get an answer, you go and pray. And in fact, one of Jesus' parables is what? You need to pray like that persistent widow who just comes over and over and over and over and over again. I don't understand all that, and we certainly can't put God in a box and say He'll always respond after you ask 3 times. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm telling you there's something interesting there that goes on where people refuse to give up, and that's this guy. He has faith, and he says, please come with me. So the most interesting thing about the story, though, is what Jesus does and doesn't do. He doesn't go. What does he say? He just simply says, go on home. When you get home, your child will be healed. Your son will be well. Here's the most amazing thing to me about the story. The guy takes him at his word and turns around and leaves and goes home. Isn't that interesting? He just says, okay, Jesus, if you say it, I believe it. And he turns around with no evidence, just knowing that Jesus said, when you go home, your child will be healed. And he travels back home. Now, it's interesting, the word there, go back home, your son will live, and the man believed Jesus' word. That word is the word logos. Remember logos from chapter 1? In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That logos, that's the same word here. Jesus is the Word, and His words give life, and Jesus doesn't have to be present. All Jesus has to do is speak the Word. What happens when Jesus speaks the Word? The world comes into existence and is created. People are healed 20 miles away. Circumstances change in a moment's time. Everything in creation is under the authority of what? Jesus' Word. It's His Word. And although they could kill Him, could they kill His Word? His Word lives forever. And it's still Jesus' Word that keeps everything in balance and heals and changes people's lives. And this guy, for some reason, this official, he got it. And when he goes home, he's almost home, and his servants have come to find him, and they said, guess what? Your son got well. He said, when did it happen? And they said, well, yesterday at 1. And he said, that's exactly the time Jesus spoke the word. When Jesus spoke the word, that child 20 miles away was immediately healed. And this guy had the faith to believe it was going to happen and turned around and went home in faith. So I think that's really fascinating. One, the power of Jesus' word, but 2, this guy's willingness, are you ready? To just take Jesus at His word. Here's the big key for today. Are you at a place in your faith where you'll just take Jesus at His word, or are you still question Him? All the time. Well, you said this, but. Well, are you going to do this, but. Something that amazes me, and I don't want this to sound spiritually prideful at all, but something that amazes me about my children is I'm going, okay, this has happened in the government over there. Here's my question. How are you guys responding? And they're like, whatever will be, will be. If God wants us here, we're going to do ministry in His name. If He wants us somewhere else, He'll take us somewhere else. Whatever Jesus wants is what we're going to do. We'd prefer to be here. But if He closes this door, He closes this door. That's faith. That's faith. Faith isn't sitting around waiting for a miraculous healing. Faith is saying when God says something, I'm going to believe it and accept it and know it's truth, and I'm not going to be questioning Him all the time on His word. I'm just going to accept His word because I believe the God that says it is the God that will do it. And that's what faith is. And all miracles are little winks by God confirming that His word is good. They build our faith, but they're not our faith. They don't predicate our faith. They're not the foundation of our faith. They're just signs. They're just signs to say, look, God is still here. Look, you can take God at His word. See what He did. When God's word comes, you can believe it, absolutely believe it 100%. Okay? So today, pretty simple message. What is it? God's word is the reality and the only reality that will live forever. And what is faith? Simply taking God at His word. And you say, well, that's pretty simple. It is pretty simple, but it is hard to live out. right? Because how many times do we want signs and miracles and proofs? And God will give them along the way, but that's not your faith. That's not your faith. I want to point out one other thing, and then we're going to jump in. We're done for the day, and we're going to jump into application. And that is this. You've looked at 4 chapters of the Gospel of John so far. In chapter 1, he talked about the world was darkness, and Jesus was bringing light into a dark world. Okay? And I want you to think about the geography of Israel. You have Jerusalem in the south, then you have Samaria, then you have Galilee. And here's how John has arranged his gospel so far. Jesus started in Jerusalem, where it was darkness. When did Nicodemus come to Jesus? In the dark. When he was there and he cleansed the temple, it said he could trust no man. So down in Jerusalem, where it's supposed to be the hub of spirituality and the hub of religion, is where the darkness reigned. Isn't that interesting? And then you go where? From there to Samaria, where, well, those people aren't supposed to be pure religious people. Those are the half-breeds. Those are the dogs. And yet he was welcomed there, and it's becoming lighter. And then when he gets home to Galilee, where the people had first rejected him, they welcomed him with open arms. And so John is writing saying, the world of Jesus Christ is always turned upside down. Because when we look at it, Jerusalem was the hub of religion, and that's where the light should be, but that's where it was the darkest. And the further you got away from it, the lighter it got, to the more, what we talked about earlier, the common people, right? Because the common people are the people that have a tendency to believe in Jesus more than the wealthy and the highly intellectual. So it's just kind of an interesting mix on how John does that when he writes his gospel. Now, don't hear me say that religion is evil. That's not what I said. I'm saying that John is using that because of what was going on in religion at that time. Okay? So, 2 application questions. Number 1 is this. I want you to go around the table and I want you to talk about the power of Jesus' words. We need to recognize the power of the word of Jesus, and that the word of Jesus is all that we need. So there's a couple of questions going to come up on the screen on the video. You guys have those before you. Let's talk about that application, and then I'll come back for the last application in just a moment. Second application has to do with faith. We need to respond to Jesus in faith, and there is this combination of the power of the word of Jesus coupled with our faith that is the foundation of everything that we're about. And so I want you to finish your time around your tables and on the video just talking about there's God's power on this side and then there's my faith here. And how do I respond in faith to Jesus? And how do I respond in faith to Jesus? Are you ready for this? Looking for his miracles, but not tying my faith to his answers, right? Because you have to be real careful, because there will come times in your life where you're asking God for things and he's going to be silent. Correct? Is that supposed to affect our faith? Absolutely not. Because what? We trust Jesus at his word. And so talk about that tension between the power of God and our faith, and how those two come together. And then the day is yours. But that is really one of the big issues that goes on to build the foundation of our faith. Okay?